It was supposed to be a simple cleaning day, nothing more. But as I moved that old, dusty shelf, I found something behind it. A door. A door I never knew existed. My curiosity got the best of me, and I opened it. But what was inside? It's something I wish I had never discovered. And now, the house doesn't feel like home anymore. It wasn't supposed to be like this. The house was supposed to be a fresh start, a place to heal. I had left everything behind. My old life, my regrets, the broken pieces of my heart. The sudden silence of the house was almost deafening, but in a strange way, it comforted me. I've been through too much recently. I needed peace. The house, with its creaky floors and dusty corners, seemed to promise exactly that. It was an old Victorian, standing at the end of a long, forgotten street. The neighborhood was quiet, too quiet, perfect for someone like me. I didn't want the chaos of city life. I didn't need the noise, the distractions, or the memories. I needed a place to breathe again, to find myself, or at least try. The house wasn't perfect. It was old, the kind of house where the floorboards groaned beneath your feet, and the windows let in more cold than you'd like to admit. But that was fine. I didn't need perfection. I just needed somewhere to exist, without the weight of the past crushing down on me. The first few days had been peaceful. Long walks through the empty streets, nights spent curled up with books and tea. The air always a little colder than it should have been. There was something comforting about the chill. The house and I, well, we were getting used to each other. I spent most of my time cleaning, organizing, and trying to make the house feel like mine. It was during one of those cleaning sessions, tucked in a quiet corner of the basement, that I noticed something I hadn't before. It was a shelf, heavy, ancient, and clearly out of place. I'd seen it before, but for some reason, it never caught my attention. Maybe I had been too busy with my own thoughts to notice the oddity of it? But that day, something about it stood out. The dust was thick around it, as if it had been untouched for years. It felt like it had been waiting for me to come across it. Curiosity, as they say, is a dangerous thing. I moved the shelf aside. The moment I did, a strange unease crept over me, but I pushed it aside, telling myself it was just nerves. Old houses had a way of making you jumpy. But then I saw it. A door, hidden, tucked away in the shadow of the shelf, as if it had always been there, waiting for someone to find it. My heart skipped a beat. The door was small, wooden, and framed in a way that made it blend in with the surrounding walls. It didn't make sense. I had been in the basement a dozen times by then. There was no door here. Not like this. The door was locked. A heavy, rusted padlock hung from the handle. It wasn't just a door. It was something else. Something out of place. Something secret. And for reasons I still don't fully understand, I couldn't stop myself. I had to know what was behind it. Part of me screamed to leave it alone, but the other part, the one buried deep inside, urged me forward. The air in the room seemed to thicken, pressing down on my chest, but I ignored it. I found a tool, forced the lock open, and the door creaked. The sound sent a shiver down my spine. It felt wrong, but I told myself it was just an old house, just an old door. Nothing to worry about. Still, my heart pounded in my ears as I slowly pushed the door open. And that's when the smell hit me. Stale, like something that hadn't been disturbed in decades. The air was thick with dust, and there was a weight to it that I couldn't explain. I should have walked away then, but I didn't. My hands trembled as I stepped inside. What I found in that room, well, I wish I had never found it. What I discovered changed everything. and nothing in this house would ever feel the same again. I stepped inside the room, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. The air was heavier than it should have been, thick with the weight of forgotten years. It felt like the room had been holding its breath, waiting for someone, waiting for me. The dim light from the basement flickered unsteadily, casting long shadows that danced around the edges of the room. My first instinct was to leave, to slam the door shut, and pretend I had never opened it. But my feet wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, drawn in by something I couldn't explain. If you like the video, please subscribe to the channel. I looked around the small room, and there was nothing that made sense. The walls were bare, except for the occasional crack running through the old plaster. But it wasn't the room itself that unsettled me. It was the feeling that something was off, like I had just crossed an invisible line. The room felt too old, too still, as if it had been locked away for a reason that no one wanted to remember. At first glance, the room appeared empty, just piles of forgotten items scattered across the floor, old boxes covered in dust, some broken furniture. But there was one thing that caught my eye: an old wooden chest sitting quietly in the corner. It was large and looked ancient, with intricate carvings on its sides. The kind of chest you'd expect to see in a pirate's treasure story, or some long-lost attic. It didn't belong here, not in this forgotten room under the house, sealed away behind a hidden door. I hesitated, my mind screaming at me to leave, but the chest seemed to pull me in, as if inviting me to open it. Slowly, I approached it, my footsteps muffled by the thick dust on the floor. As my fingers brushed against the rough wood, a chill ran down my spine. The chest felt alive somehow, its presence almost suffocating. There was something heavy about it, something old and dangerous. But still, I couldn't resist. My hands, almost of their own accord, went to the clasp and opened it. Inside was a jumble of old photographs, yellowed and curling at the edges. At first, I thought they were just random family photos, nothing special. But as I flipped through them, my breath caught in my throat. Some of the faces looked familiar. Not just familiar in the way that old photos do, but familiar like I had seen these people before, somewhere, somehow. Some of the photos showed the house, this very house, though it looked different, almost younger. The furniture, the layout, everything was different. But the most unsettling part was the people in the pictures. They weren't strangers. One of them looked exactly like me. Same eyes, same smile, but much older. I couldn't explain it. It didn't make sense. I stumbled back, the photos slipping from my hands and falling to the floor. My heart raced. I couldn't breathe. It was as if the room itself had turned against me, suffocating me with its secrets. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible. The house had been abandoned for so long. I was the first to move in, right? But these people, these faces, how were they connected to me? To this place? There had to be an explanation, something that could make sense of all of this. But I couldn't find one. The chest was still open, and my eyes were drawn back to it, as if it were calling me. I reached back down to pick up the photos, but as my fingers touched the floor, I noticed something else, something even more disturbing. Beneath the photos was a small leather-bound journal. I pulled it out, hands trembling. The leather was cracked with age, and the pages inside were brittle. The ink faded, but still legible. I began reading. The first few pages were harmless enough, nothing more than musings on daily life. But as I flipped further, the tone shifted. The writer spoke of strange happenings, of voices in the walls, of an overwhelming sense of being watched. The entries grew more frantic, more desperate. And then, the last page. The handwriting was rushed, barely readable, but the words burned into my mind. You opened the door. Now you can never leave. The house won't let you. I froze. The room seemed to close in around me, the air thick and suffocating. The door behind me, was it still open? I couldn't tell. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the journal. The fear that had been creeping under my skin was now a full-blown panic. I tried to stand, to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I was trapped in that room, just as the journal had said. I had made a mistake I couldn't undo. And now, I had no idea how to get out. The air in the room felt colder, thicker, almost like it was pressing in on me, suffocating me. I stared at the photos scattered around the floor, my heart racing. Each one seemed more haunting than the last. I picked up another, this time an image of a family standing in front of the house, smiling as if everything was fine. The woman in the picture, her eyes were hauntingly familiar. I couldn't place her, but there was something about her expression, something that made my stomach churn. She looked so content, but her eyes were dark, almost hollow. And then I noticed it, right next to her. A man with the same dark eyes. His face was etched with a familiarity I couldn't shake, but it was a memory just out of reach. I felt the journal still in my hands, the weight of it almost unbearable. The leather cover was cold against my skin, and the pages inside were brittle, curling at the edges. My hands trembled as I opened the first page. It was written in a flowing script, the words almost too neat, too perfect for someone so seemingly frantic. The entries began innocently enough, just day-to-day musings about life in the house. But as I read on, the tone shifted. The words began to slant, the letters jagged, hurried. The writer's mind seemed to unravel with each sentence. The house itself became a character in the story, a dark, looming presence that didn't want to be disturbed. The voices are louder tonight. I can hear them in the walls, creeping through the cracks. They whisper in languages I can't understand, but they know my name. I don't know how. I don't know why. They call me, calling me to stay forever. I felt my breath catch in my throat as I read on, the words digging into me like nails on a chalkboard. It was all becoming clearer now. The strange atmosphere in the house, the way it always felt like someone was watching me. It wasn't just in my head. This house, this cursed place, it had a mind of its own. The journal's next entry sent a shiver down my spine. I've seen them. They stand by the door, watching. They want in, and I know I must not open it again. The door is a trap, a promise made to the house, and I am bound to it now, just as they were, just as you will be. The words were getting more desperate now. I couldn't put the journal down, though every part of me screamed to stop, to run, to lock the door and pretend none of this ever happened. But I couldn't. I had to know more. I needed to understand what was happening, what I had stumbled upon. The next page was the final entry, and it sent a chill through my entire body. You opened the door! Now you can never leave. The house won't let you. I slammed the journal shut, the words echoing in my head, hammering against my skull. I didn't want to believe it. It had to be some kind of sick joke, right? The ramblings of someone who had gone mad, who had imagined all of this. But deep down, I knew it wasn't a joke. I knew something wasn't right. I looked around the room, the dim light casting long shadows that stretched across the walls. My gaze landed on the photos again. I picked up another one, this time an image of the woman who looked so much like me. It was from a different angle, but I could see her face more clearly now. There was no mistaking it. This was me, or at least someone who looked exactly like me. She had the same eyes, the same smile, the same dark, hollow look in her eyes. My heart skipped a beat, and I felt the room spin around me. This wasn't just some coincidence. This house, these people, they were connected to me in ways I couldn't yet understand. I looked at the door, the one I had opened, and that's when it hit me. It wasn't just a door. It was a portal to something far darker than I had ever imagined. And now that I had opened it, I couldn't close it again. I was trapped in a house that had a mind of its own, a house that wanted me to stay forever. The whispers were back, louder this time, swirling around me, calling me to stay. And for the first time since I'd moved in, I wasn't sure if I wanted to escape. The pull was too strong. I didn't know if I could fight it anymore. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The house, which had once felt like a sanctuary, now felt more like a prison. It wasn't just the door, or the room, or the journal anymore. It was everything. It was as if the house itself was watching me, waiting for me to make the wrong move. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself that I was just imagining things. But the longer I stayed, the harder it became to pretend that everything was normal. The first incident happened late one evening, a few nights after I found the room. I was sitting in the living room, trying to distract myself with a book, when I heard it. A soft, scraping sound. At first, I thought it was the wind, the house settling like it always did. But it was different. It was too deliberate, too purposeful. I put the book down, straining to hear. The scraping continued, followed by a faint tapping noise, like someone was knocking on the walls. I told myself it was just the old house, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest, and slowly walked toward the hallway. The sound seemed to come from the room where I'd found the hidden door, but when I reached it, the house was silent again. I pressed my ear to the wall, my breath shallow, listening for anything at all. There was nothing. I waited, a nervous knot tightening in my stomach, but the silence only deepened the unease that was growing inside me. I told myself it was nothing, that I was just being paranoid. But something in my gut told me otherwise. The next day, I noticed something else. A small picture frame in the hallway had been moved. It was nothing major, but it was enough to make my skin crawl. The frame had been placed on a table right in the center of the hallway, something I was sure I hadn't done. I picked it up and saw it was a photo of the house, taken from a different angle, a different time, a different set of eyes. It was as if someone had been watching it, had been watching me. The feeling was undeniable now. I wasn't alone in this house. That night, the whispering started. At first it was faint, barely audible, like someone speaking in another room. I tried to ignore it, but the whispers didn't stop. They grew louder. It wasn't just one voice anymore. It was a chorus of voices, all murmuring in low tones that I couldn't understand. The air felt thick, like I was suffocating. I pulled the covers over my head, hoping the sound would go away, but it didn't. It got worse. I couldn't sleep. I lay awake in bed, my heart hammering in my chest, straining to hear the whispers. They seemed to come from all around me, closer now, almost as if they were in the room with me. I sat up, my hands trembling, my breath shallow. I turned toward the door, feeling like I couldn't breathe, and that's when I saw it. The shadow. It moved across the hallway, stretching unnaturally long, as if it had been waiting for me to notice it. My stomach twisted into knots as the figure seemed to pause, its outline dark and shifting. I blinked, and when I opened my eyes, the shadow was gone. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was standing just outside my door, waiting for me to open it. I didn't dare move. I stayed frozen, listening for any sound, but the whispering had stopped. The silence was deafening. Over the next few days, it didn't get better. It got worse. I started seeing things, flashes of figures out of the corner of my eye, people who weren't really there. I'd walk past a mirror and catch a glimpse of someone standing behind me, only to turn around and find the room empty. The same woman from the photos. She would be standing at the end of the hallway, staring at me with those same hollow eyes, before disappearing into thin air. I would blink, and she would be gone. But the feeling remained, always watching, always waiting. I couldn't take it anymore. The house was alive. It wasn't just the walls, the hidden room, or the journal. It was everything. The house had a presence, a dark force that seemed to be closing in on me. I was suffocating under its weight, and I knew I was trapped. There was no escaping it. I should have left. I should have packed my things and run. But every time I tried, the whispers, the shadows, and the feeling of being watched stopped me. I couldn't escape. I was bound to the house now. And I knew, I just knew, there was no way out. The house had a grip on me now, tighter than I could have ever imagined. I tried to ignore it, to convince myself that it was just my mind playing tricks. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw her, the woman from the photos, standing at the foot of my bed, her hollow eyes staring at me, her mouth moving in silent whispers I could never understand. The weight of it all was unbearable, and no matter how hard I tried, there was no escape from it. The walls closed in around me with every passing hour. I knew deep down that I had triggered something in this house, something dark and ancient that had been waiting for someone to stumble upon it. But I still couldn't shake the feeling that there was more. There had to be something I was missing, some detail I hadn't pieced together yet. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I wasn't just dealing with strange occurrences or bad luck. This was something far worse. This was something that had been waiting for me, watching me from the moment I walked in. I was bound to it now. I couldn't stop thinking about the journal. Its words echoed in my mind like a death sentence. You opened the door. Now you can never leave. I felt the weight of those words pressing down on me with every breath I took. It wasn't just a warning, it was the truth. A truth I couldn't escape. There were days when I tried to convince myself that maybe it wasn't as bad as it seemed. I'd wake up, shake off the dread, and force myself to go through the motions. But there was no denying the way the house felt now. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was alive. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind through the cracked windows, every shadow that passed by, everything was watching me. The house had become a living, breathing thing, and I was its prisoner. Then came the night when I couldn't take it anymore. The whispers were louder than ever, swirling around me, mocking me. I felt like I was going crazy. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. The walls were pressing in on me, and I had no escape. That's when I remembered the other photos, the ones that looked like they had been taken just a few days before I moved in. The people in them were still here, still living in this house, trapped in the same way I was. They had disappeared, yes, but they hadn't truly left. They were part of this house now. They were its prisoners, just like me. It hit me all at once. The hidden room, the journal, the whispers, they weren't just some strange coincidence. The room had been sealed for a reason. The house had been hiding its dark secret from me. The previous residents had discovered what I had. They had opened the door, and the house had taken them. It had driven them mad, trapped them in its walls, and left them as part of its twisted history. And now, it had done the same to me. I couldn't escape. I couldn't leave. The door wasn't just a door. It was a barrier, a boundary that should never have been crossed. Once I opened it, I had crossed that line, and there was no turning back. The house had claimed me. But the worst part? The part that made my blood run cold? The house didn't just claim its victims, it consumed them. The people in the photos, the ones who looked so much like me. There was a connection between us, a connection I couldn't escape. I wasn't just trapped in the house, I was becoming part of it. I was becoming one of them. The walls closed in around me, and the whispers grew louder. I knew what I had to do, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I had to seal the room, lock it away, but I knew it wouldn't matter. The house would find a way. It always did. And as I stood there, staring at the locked door, a single thought ran through my mind. I should have never opened it. But it was too late now. The house had already claimed me, and I would never leave. I sat in the middle of the room, the journal still clutched tightly in my hands, my breath shallow and uneven. The weight of it all was suffocating. Everything I had known, everything I had hoped for, was slipping away. I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was alive, watching, waiting for me to accept my fate. It wasn't just a home anymore. It had become something else, something darker, and it had claimed me. The walls seemed to pulse with every beat of my heart, the whispers growing louder with each passing second. They weren't just whispers anymore. They were voices, clear and distinct, calling me, beckoning me deeper into the house. I wanted to scream, to run, but my feet wouldn't move. I was trapped, not just physically, but in a way I couldn't explain. The house was inside me now, and there was no escaping it. I could hear the creaking of the floorboards above me, the shifting of shadows in the corners of the room. My mind screamed at me to leave, but my body refused to listen. The house had already taken hold of me, and I knew, deep down, there was no escaping its grip. I wasn't just living in this house anymore. I was part of it. Every day felt the same. The whispers, the shadows, the strange flickers of movement out of the corner of my eye. The house didn't allow me to forget. It was always there, always watching, reminding me that I couldn't escape. It had marked me. It had claimed me. And I couldn't fight it. I had tried. I had tried to leave, tried to ignore the signs, but the house wouldn't let me go. And as I sat there, staring at the door I had opened, the room felt colder, darker. The air was thick with something I couldn't identify, but it was there, pressing down on me, suffocating me. I wanted to scream, to shout, to beg for help. But the only sound that came was the faint whisper of my own name, carried on the wind, and I knew deep down that I was alone. The house had claimed me, and there was no going back. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have walked away, or would you have opened the door like I did? The choice, it seems, is never